Power shifts in an instant, but structural inequality endures for generations. When the ruling party lost its absolute parliamentary majority for the first time in 30 years, falling below 40%, the political foundations of South Africa fractured. Into this vacuum stepped mainstream commentators led by analyst Prince Mashele, declaring that the economic freedom fighters had suffered a fatal blow. They asserted that following a high-profile resignation, the intellectual engine of the party was gone, leaving behind an unthinking political vessel. Yet, as establishment media heralded an impending collapse, Julius Malema stepped forward to confront his accusers directly. He turned a mocking personal assault into an uncompromising assertion of dignity and organizational survival. This is not merely a dispute over party leadership. It is a battle for the soul of radical politics across the continent. If power changes hands, but not structure, has anything really changed? Do not look away. What comes next may change how we read the political map of Southern Africa. If you believe in these stories of resilience, give us your like, leave your thoughts, and subscribe to South African Dynamics to continue this journey together. To understand the storm currently engulfing South African politics, one must look at the seismic rupture that shook the nation's political landscape in August 2024. After 11 years standing side by side as the twin pillars of the economic freedom fighters, Floyd Shivambu, the founding deputy president, announced his abrupt resignation. Shivambu did not merely step back from public life. He crossed the political aisle to align himself with former President Jacob Zuma and his newly formed Umkhonto party. This was not a routine political migration. It was an earthquake that reverberated through every corridor of authority from Pretoria to Johannesburg. Shivambu had served as the chief policy strategist of the Red Berets, the administrator of its parliamentary machinery, and the quiet ideologue behind its most radical economic proposals. For a political movement that had established itself as the third largest force in the National Assembly, holding 39 parliamentary seats and commanding the loyalty of over 3 million voters, the departure of its second-in-command presented an immediate crisis of public perception. It did not take long for political opponents and media commentators to exploit this fracture. Leading the charge was prominent political analyst Prince Mashele, whose blistering commentary sent shockwaves across broadcasting networks. Mashele publicly declared that with Shivambu's exit, the intellectual core of the party had effectively walked out of the door. In a series of provocative statements, Mashele argued that Shivambu was the sole author of the party's foundational policy documents, claiming that without him, the economic freedom fighters were reduced to an unthinking reactive vessel. According to this narrative, Julius Malema provided the fiery rhetoric, but Shivambu provided the mind. Mashele went so far as to suggest that the party's capacity to formulate policy structure, parliamentary debates, and articulate economic theory had been permanently severed. It was a calculated attempt to delegitimize the movement, painting its leadership as intellectually bankrupt and entirely reliant on a single departed individual. Yet this commentary ignored the deeper institutional reality of how political movements function when contending for the seat of power. To reduce a decade of radical political development to the intellect of one man is to misunderstand the nature of ideological movements. A rigorous examination of the party's historical record tells a fundamentally different story. From its inception, the economic freedom fighters built its platform upon structural policy documents developed through collective national assemblies and policy conferences. A comparative analysis of the party's founding election manifesto in 2014, its updated platform in 2019, and its latest framework in 2024 demonstrates a striking ideological continuity. The core tenets, the nationalization of mines without compensation, the expropriation of land, and the total economic emancipation of the working class remained entirely intact. The policy framework was not the property of an individual, it was an institutional archive built by collective struggle. Nevertheless, in the volatile arena of South African political discourse, perception often becomes reality. The establishment media seized upon Mashele's commentary, framing the departure not merely as a personnel change, but as an intellectual death sentence. Critics argued that without Shivambu's stabilizing analytical influence, the party would devolve into erratic populism, unable to offer a coherent alternative to the governing coalition. The narrative gained rapid traction among political opponents who sought to fracture the radical left and weaken its standing among the electorate. For millions of supporters who looked to the movement as their sole voice against systemic poverty, the accusation was deeply troubling. As Prince Mashele framed this departure as an intellectual death sentence, he severely underestimated how Julius Malema would turn a personal attack into a masterclass of political counter-offensive. When Julius Malema stood before the assembled press corps, the atmosphere was thick with political tension. Journalists eager for a story of internal collapse pushed line after line of questioning regarding Floyd Shivambu's departure. One reporter, Mashele, went so far as to repeat salacious claims circulating across social media platforms, mockingly questioning whether the party's capacity to function had been completely extinguished without its former deputy. The line of attack was deliberate. It was designed to reduce serious political discourse to personal mockery. Rather than reacting with reckless anger, Malema stepped to the podium with calculated restraint, dismantling the premise of the attack, piece by piece. He confronted the media's obsession with personalities over principle, exposing how commentators like Prince Mashele sought to erase the collective intellectual labor of an entire political movement. Addressing the claim that the party's brain had left Malema, offered a masterclass in political counter-offensive. He pointed directly to the ideological continuity of the party's platforms, issuing a direct challenge to political analysts and media commentators alike. Ideas do not leave simply because a single individual walks out of an organization, he declared. Ideas leave only when there is a fundamental shift in what a party writes, presents, and fights for in Parliament. To prove his point, he urged the public to place the manifestos of 2014, 2019, and 2024 side by side. The core tenets remained untouched. The demand for land expropriation without compensation, the nationalization of strategic economic sectors, and the assertion of economic sovereignty were forged in collective national assemblies not invented by one man. By grounding his argument in documentation rather than emotion, Malema turned the narrative of an intellectual vacuum on its head. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, consider becoming a member of South African Dynamics. Every membership is a vote for our mission to document narratives mainstream media refuses to tell. Join us and stand with the principle that African dignity belongs to Africa. Malema's defense then shifted from institutional integrity to personal dignity. Refusing to allow media commentators to invade his private life or trivialize his marriage, he drew a firm boundary between public service and personal accountability. He reminded the nation that his political journey was not born out of media endorsement, but rooted in deep family principles. Recalling his late grandmother, who stood by him quietly during his most perilous legal trials at the High Court in Polokwane, without seeking public attention, Malema highlighted the quiet discipline that underpinned his leadership. He dismissed the salacious rumors surrounding his marriage with sharp disdain, placing his personal conduct in the tradition of disciplined struggle leaders like Nelson Mandela. This was a deliberate positioning, presenting himself not as a fleeting political figure, but as a seasoned leader whose political character was forged in adversity and unyielding family loyalty. By the time the briefing concluded, the narrative built by establishment media had begun to fray. Malema had successfully reframed the departure not as a fatal blow, but as a test of organizational maturity and ideological resilience. He asserted that the movement belonged to its millions of working-class supporters, not to any single leader who chose to walk away. Yet beneath the fiery rhetoric and personal vindication, lay a far more dangerous reality: could the EFF survive the fracturing of South Africa's radical left? The political fallout of this internal schism extended far beyond party headquarters in Johannesburg, sending tremor waves through the broader national architecture. The Floyd Shivambu resignation occurred at a moment of unprecedented vulnerability for South Africa's democratic order. Following the historic general election of May 2024, in which the African National Congress lost its absolute parliamentary majority for the first time since the end of apartheid, a coalition government of national unity was established between the ANC and the centrist market-orientated Democratic Alliance. This political realignment pushed radical opposition parties into a high-stakes struggle for institutional survival. Rather than consolidating a unified left-wing bloc to challenge the new governing coalition, the sudden split between the Economic Freedom Fighters and Jacob Zuma's Umkhonto party fragmented the radical electorate. For millions of working-class citizens facing 60% youth unemployment and systemic landlessness, this division raised immediate fears of a lingering South Africa crisis, where opposition voices might be diluted by internal rivalries rather than united against economic inequality. In this volatile environment, the definitive Julius Malema response served as a critical political anchor, preventing a destabilizing wave of mass defections across provincial branches and municipal structures. By directly confronting media commentators and asserting ideological continuity, Malema reassured a frustrated constituency that the struggle for economic transformation remained active. Yet the civil consequences of this political realignment remain profound. For ordinary families across township communities, the parliamentary drama in Pretoria offers little immediate relief from rising living costs, decaying municipal infrastructure, and persistent energy insecurity. The battle lines are no longer drawn merely along traditional party boundaries, but between those who advocate for incremental reform within the existing market framework and those who demand a fundamental restructuring of state power. This is not silence. This is not noise. This is the relentless assertion of accountability. Pause for a moment and share with us in the comments where you are watching this video from, whether from the United States, Europe, or across the African continent. South African Dynamics wants to thank you personally and to send a wish across the distance: may freedom and dignity walk beside you wherever you are. Let the comments below become a map of solidarity. Tell us your thoughts. Do you believe political movements can survive the departure of key strategic architects, or do they inevitably fracture under the weight of internal rivalry? As party organizers work to enforce internal discipline ahead of upcoming local government elections, the fragmentation of the parliamentary opposition has temporarily strengthened the ruling coalition's legislative leverage. However, it has also deepened ideological polarization across the electorate. The central question facing voters is whether radical policy frameworks can maintain their momentum when stripped of key technical negotiators. If the parliamentary opposition remains divided, the seat of power in Pretoria will remain firmly under the control of coalition forces largely insulated from radical structural demands. The balance of power within the National Assembly has been redrawn, leaving ordinary citizens to weigh the cost of political division against the promise of systemic change. While Pretoria struggled with internal realignment and civil uncertainty, decision-makers in Western capitals were quietly watching every move, weighing the geopolitical risks of a shifting South African landscape. Far beyond the borders of South Africa, diplomatic missions in Washington, London, and Brussels monitored the political turmoil in Pretoria with sharp calculation. For Western policymakers and global financial institutions, South Africa is not merely a regional democracy. It is the economic engine of the continent, holding vast reserves of critical minerals necessary for global supply chains. When the Red Berets faced an internal fracture, international observers immediately assessed the broader implications of the EFF leadership crisis. Western intelligence briefings and economic risk agencies weighed whether a weakened opposition would stabilize the market-orientated governing coalition, or whether the fragmentation of the radical left would trigger unpredictable political instability. For foreign investors, the central concern has always been the party's foundational platform, the unconditional expropriation of land without compensation, and the state nationalization of strategic mining sectors. In the diplomatic corridors of foreign capitals, the high-profile debate involving Prince Mashele Malema and the battle for ideological dominance was closely scrutinized as a barometer of radical political sentiment. Foreign analysts sought to determine whether the movement's radical economic agenda was tied to individual personalities or deeply embedded within the working-class electorate. If the intellectual foundation of the movement had indeed departed, as critics claimed, Western diplomats reasoned that the threat of radical land reform and resource nationalization might recede. However, if Malema successfully demonstrated that the ideological framework remained intact, foreign governments had to prepare for a sustained, long-term challenge to Western economic interests in Southern Africa. Furthermore, within the expanding architecture of the BRICS alliance, Malema's anti-imperialist stance and vocal opposition to Western diplomatic influence continue to resonate across the Global South, positioning the movement as a crucial counterweight to traditional hegemony. From the perspective of African Union diplomats and regional leaders within the Southern African Development Community, the stability of South Africa's political opposition is vital for regional democratic health. A fractured opposition risks concentrating unchecked authority within the governing alliance, undermining institutional checks and balances. As international media outlets framed the confrontation as a decisive test of political survival, Malema used the global spotlight to reassert his movement's anti-colonial credentials, demonstrating that sovereign political movements cannot be dictated to by external commentators or foreign interests. With foreign powers watching every development and internal rivalries deepening across the parliamentary floor, what path remains for Malema to secure the long-term future of his movement? As South Africa navigates this pivotal juncture in its post-apartheid history, the future of the economic freedom fighters depends not on individual personalities, but on its institutional resilience and strategic clarity. The departure of key founding members presents both immediate risks and profound opportunities for a movement seeking to redefine the national discourse. For Julius Malema, the immediate task is clear: consolidating internal party structures, fortifying grassroots mobilization across all 9 provinces, and preparing for the critical municipal elections ahead. To maintain its standing as the vanguard of the working class, the movement must demonstrate that its radical economic vision is backed by administrative competence and unwavering political discipline. This is not reform. This is not rhetoric. This is accountability. The broader struggle confronting the nation goes beyond parliamentary tactics. It strikes at the heart of economic sovereignty and systemic justice. Decades after the formal transition to democratic rule, the fundamental structural inequities of land distribution and wealth concentration remain unaddressed. By refusing to succumb to narrative attacks from establishment commentators, Malema has reaffirmed that true independence requires the complete dismantling of economic patronage. The choices made by political leaders in Pretoria over the coming years will determine whether the country achieves genuine economic transformation or remains trapped in perpetual cycles of division. In this high-stakes arena, the tension between accountability and impunity will dictate the trajectory of Southern Africa for a generation to come. Before we close, let us pause. What you have witnessed today is not simply a debate, it is a reminder that sovereignty and dignity are still alive. If this message has moved you, subscribe to South African Dynamics. By subscribing, you choose to walk with us into the next chapter of Africa's unfolding story. Subscribe now and stand ready for what comes next. Ultimately, the enduring strength of any political movement lies in its ability to inspire collective hope while upholding the dignity of the people it claims to represent. The road ahead will demand rigorous policy formulation, principled leadership, and an unyielding commitment to the working class. As new political alliances form and old structures crumble under the weight of public expectation, the demand for true economic emancipation remains as urgent as ever. The battle for the soul of the EFF is far from over, But the question of who truly holds the key to its future has now been laid bare. Political movements are rarely defined by single moments of internal crisis. Rather, they are judged by their enduring ideological foundation when tested by adversity. The intense national debate surrounding the Prince Mashele Malema clash revealed a fundamental truth about South African democracy. While mainstream media commentators attempted to portray the party as an unthinking vessel following key resignations, the decisive Julius Malema response demonstrated that an authentic movement for economic emancipation cannot be reduced to the intellect of one individual. Ideas forged in collective national assemblies do not vanish simply because a single leader departs. They remain embedded within the hearts of millions of working-class citizens who continue to demand land redistribution, economic sovereignty, and structural justice. As the country moves forward under the weight of severe socio-economic challenges, the shadow of historical inequality still stretches across every township and rural community. The ongoing political realignment within the National Assembly serves as a stark reminder that true liberation requires far more than political office. It demands the total transformation of economic power. Through his steadfast defense of party manifesto documents, the Julius Malema response reaffirmed that the fight for dignity and self-determination transcends individual political careers. When the dust finally settles on this period of parliamentary turbulence, history will not measure the strength of a movement by the commentary of its critics, but by its unyielding commitment to the people it serves. As the nation stands at the crossroads between incremental reform and radical structural change, one profound question remains for every citizen reflecting on the road ahead. If the past is never fully addressed, can the future ever be equal?